I'll never forget the sound of my sister's laugh at our father's funeral. It wasn't the nervous kind you sometimes hear at somber gatherings, the awkward release of tension that people can't quite control. No, this was different. This was triumphant. Mocking. It cut through the quiet murmur of mourners like a knife through silk, and every head in that chapel turned toward her. She stood there in her designer black dress, the one she'd bought specifically for this occasion, she'd told me earlier, with her phone pressed to her ear. Her perfectly manicured hand covered her mouth, but not enough to hide the smile. Not enough to muffle the words that drifted across the pews. Don't worry, the house is mine. I made sure of it. My blood ran cold. Our father, the man we were supposed to be honoring, whose body lay just feet away in that polished casket, hadn't even been in the ground yet. And Rachel was already celebrating what she thought she'd won. I sat frozen in the front row, my hands clenched so tightly in my lap that my knuckles had gone white. People were staring. I could feel their eyes moving between Rachel and me, could sense their discomfort, their silent judgment. But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was sit there and feel the weight of 15 years of sacrifice crumbling around me. 15 years. That's how long I'd put my life on hold to take care of our father. 15 years of changing bandages, managing medications, driving to endless doctor's appointments. 15 years of watching my friends build careers, get married, travel the world, while I stay behind in that old house on Maple Street, making sure Dad didn't die alone. And Rachel? She'd visited maybe twice a year, usually on holidays, always with an excuse about how busy her life in the city was, how demanding her marketing job was, how she just couldn't get away. But she'd gotten away for this. For the funeral. For the will reading. For the house. The service ended in a blur. I went through the motions, accepting condolences, nodding at kind words I couldn't really hear, mechanically thanking people for coming. Rachel stood on the other side of the room, surrounded by distant relatives who didn't know any better, playing the role of the grieving daughter with Oscar-worthy performance. When the last mourner finally left, she approached me. Her heels clicked against the funeral home's marble floor with a rhythm that sounded almost victorious. "Well," she said, not quite meeting my eyes, "that's over. The notary wants to see us tomorrow at 10 for the will reading. Don't be late." That was it. No, how are you holding up? No acknowledgement of what I'd just witnessed. Just logistics and a thinly veiled command. I watched her walk away, her designer purse swinging from her shoulder, and something inside me finally broke. Not with sadness. I'd cried all my tears during those long nights, sitting beside Dad's bed, watching him fade a little more each day. No, what broke was something else. Some final thread of sisterly loyalty. Some last hope that maybe, deep down, Rachel had a shred of decency left. That night, alone in Dad's house, the house I'd lived in for 15 years while Rachel built her glamorous life elsewhere, I couldn't sleep. I walked through rooms filled with memories. The kitchen where Dad taught me to make his famous Sunday pancakes, the living room where we'd watched old movies together during his good days, the bedroom where I'd held his hand as he took his last breath. Every corner of this place held a piece of my life, of our life together. And Rachel wanted to take it all away. Had already taken it, if her phone call was to be believed. I thought about confronting her, demanding to know what she'd done. But I was tired. So desperately tired. And part of me, the part that had been ignored and taken for granted for so long, just wanted to see how this would play out. Because I knew something Rachel didn't know. I knew our father. The morning of the will reading arrived with the kind of gray, drizzling rain that seems custom-made for misery. I dressed simply, jeans and a sweater, my hair pulled back in a ponytail, while Rachel would undoubtedly show up looking like she'd stepped off a fashion runway. That had always been our dynamic. She was the golden child, the successful one, the daughter who'd escaped to bigger and better things. I was just there, reliable, forgettable, or so everyone thought. I arrived at the notary's office 15 minutes early and sat in the waiting room, watching rain streak down the windows. The office was one of those old buildings in downtown, the kind with creaky wooden floors and walls lined with legal books that probably hadn't been touched in decades. It smelled like old paper and furniture polish. Rachel swept in exactly at 10 because of course she did. She'd always had impeccable timing when it mattered to her. She barely glanced at me before taking a seat on the opposite side of the waiting room, pulling out her phone and typing furiously. Probably texting her husband about the house. About her plans to sell it, most likely. The real estate market in our neighborhood had exploded in recent years. That old house on Maple Street was worth a small fortune now. A fortune I'd watched appreciate while I changed Dad's bedpans and reminded him to take his pills. Ms. Chun? Ms. Rachel Chun. The notary's assistant appeared in the doorway, a young woman with a professional smile. Mr. Harrison will see you now. We filed into the office in silence. Mr. Harrison was exactly what you'd imagine a small-town notary to look like. Late 60s, silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a kind face marked by decades of witnessing family drama play out over inheritance documents. He gestured for us to sit in the 2 chairs facing his massive oak desk. Ladies, he began, his voice gentle but formal. First, let me offer my condolences for your loss. Your father was a good man. I had the pleasure of knowing him for many years. Rachel made a small noise of acknowledgement. I just nodded, not trusting my voice. Mr. Harrison opened a folder on his desk, and I caught a glimpse of official-looking documents with Dad's signature at the bottom. My heart started pounding. This was it. This was the moment Rachel had been waiting for. The moment she'd apparently already celebrated. Now, Mr. Harrison continued, looking between us over his glasses, your father came to see me several times over the past few years to update his will. The most recent version was executed just 6 months ago, and it is this version we'll be reviewing today. 6 months ago. That would have been shortly after Dad's cancer diagnosis. When we'd learned that the treatments weren't working anymore. When everything shifted from fighting to managing comfort. I'd been there for all of it. Rachel had sent a fruit basket. Mr. Harrison began reading, and at first it was standard legal language, declarations, executor appointments, debt settlements. I tried to focus, but my mind kept drifting to Rachel's laugh at the funeral, to her phone call, to the certainty in her voice. The house is mine. Then I heard Mr. Harrison say something about the house, and my attention snapped back. As for the primary residence located at 428 Maple Street, he read, including all contents therein and the property on which it stands. Rachel sat forward in her chair. I saw her hands grip the armrests, saw the smile starting to form on her lips. I leave entirely to my daughter, Jennifer Chin. The silence that followed was so complete, so absolute, that I could hear the rain pattering against the window, could hear the old building settling, could hear Rachel's sharp intake of breath. What? The word exploded from Rachel like a gunshot. That can't be right. There must be a mistake. Mr. Harrison's expression didn't change. There's no mistake, Miss Chun. Your father was quite clear about his wishes. But he told me. Rachel stopped abruptly, her face flushing. We discussed. He wouldn't. I sat perfectly still, not daring to move, not daring to believe what I was hearing. Perhaps you should continue reading, Mr. Harrison, I said quietly, my voice surprisingly steady. He nodded and returned to the document. To my daughter Rachel Chun, I leave my investment portfolio, valued at approximately $80,000, as well as my collection of vintage watches and my vehicle. 80,000? Rachel's voice was shrill now. The house is worth 10 times that. This is insane. He wasn't in his right mind. I'll contest this. Ms. Chun. Mr. Harrison's voice cut through her rising hysteria with quiet authority. Your father specifically anticipated that you might react this way. He asked me to read you this personal note if you contested the will. Mr. Harrison pulled out a separate sheet of paper, not the formal legal document, but regular notebook paper, the kind Dad always kept by his favorite chair. I recognized his handwriting immediately, that slightly shaky script that had gotten worse in his final months. Dear Rachel, Mr. Harrison read, and suddenly it was as if Dad was in the room with us. If you're hearing this, it means you've reacted exactly as I feared you would. You're angry. You feel cheated. You think this is unfair. Rachel had gone pale. She opened her mouth as if to protest, but Mr. Harrison kept reading. I want you to understand my reasoning. When you were little, you were my sunshine, bright, ambitious, full of dreams. I encouraged you to chase those dreams, to build the life you wanted in the city, to become the successful woman I knew you could be. And you did. You became everything you wanted to be, and I'm proud of that. I saw tears forming in Rachel's eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were from grief or frustration. But success came with a price. Somewhere along the way, you forgot where you came from. You forgot the value of showing up, of being present. When I got sick, really sick, you sent flowers and made phone calls. You came for holidays and took photos for your social media. But you didn't stay. You didn't sit with me through the bad nights. You didn't hold my hand when I was scared. A tear rolled down my cheek. I remembered those nights. So many nights. Jennifer did, Mr. Harrison continued. Jennifer put her life on hold for 15 years. She turned down job opportunities. She ended relationships because her partners couldn't understand why she wouldn't just put me in a home. She sacrificed her youth, her freedom, her chance to build her own life, all to make sure I didn't face the end alone. Rachel was crying openly now, but I couldn't look at her. I was staring at a spot on Mr. Harrison's desk, trying to hold myself together. The house isn't just a house, Rachel. It's 15 years of Jennifer's life. It's thousands of hours of care, of love, of choosing family over self. She earned every brick, every floorboard, every memory contained in those walls. The money I'm leaving you? Consider it payment for all the birthdays and holidays you showed up for. But the house? That belongs to the daughter who stayed. Mr. Harrison paused, then continued with the final paragraph. I love you both. I always have, always will. But love doesn't mean everything gets divided equally. It means everything gets divided fairly. I hope someday you'll understand the difference. Dad. The office fell silent again. Mr. Harrison carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the folder. There's more to the will, some smaller bequests to charities, details about the investment accounts, but that's the essential content regarding the estate division. Rachel stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is... She struggled for words, her face a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite read. This is bullshit. I had a life. I had a career. Was I supposed to give up everything just to? No one asked you to give up everything, I said, finally finding my voice. It came out stronger than I expected. But you could have given up something. Anything. 1 weekend a month. A phone call every few days that wasn't just 5 minutes of small talk. Some acknowledgement that Dad was dying and I was drowning. You never asked for help. I shouldn't have had to. The words burst out of me, 15 years of resentment finally finding their voice. He was your father too? But you made your choice, Rachel. You chose your career, your Instagram perfect life, your convenience. And that's fine. That was your right. But you don't get to make that choice and then also get the reward that came from my choice. She stared at me, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Maybe recognition, maybe shame. But then her expression hardened. You're going to regret this, she said coldly. Family is supposed to mean something. You're right, I replied quietly. It is. Dad knew that. That's why he wrote that letter. Rachel grabbed her purse and stormed out, her heels clicking violently against the wooden floor. The door slammed behind her, and then there was just silence. Mr. Harrison and I sat in the quiet aftermath, the rain still pattering against the windows. Are you all right, Miss Chin? He asked gently. I took a shaky breath. I don't know. I didn't know he was going to do this. He never said anything. He wanted it to be a surprise. He came to my office about 8 months ago before the final diagnosis and told me he'd been watching both of you, evaluating how you were handling his illness. He said he'd spent months agonizing over the decision, but ultimately, he felt this was the right thing to do. Mr. Harrison smiled slightly. He was adamant about that letter too. Rewrote it 4 times to get it exactly right. The weeks after the will reading were strange and painful. Rachel stopped answering my calls and texts. Our extended family, what little there was of it, divided themselves awkwardly between us. Some understood Dad's decision. Others thought I'd somehow manipulated him, turned him against Rachel in his final years. That hurt almost as much as Rachel's betrayal. The house felt different now. Walking through those rooms I'd known for 15 years, I couldn't help but see them through a new lens. This wasn't just Dad's house anymore, or the place I'd been living in a kind of suspended animation. It was mine. Legally, officially mine. But it felt empty. I'd spent so long being a caretaker that I'd forgotten how to be anything else. The routines I'd built my life around, medications at 8, breakfast at 9, doctor's appointments on Tuesdays and Fridays, physical therapy on Wednesdays, were gone. For the first time in 15 years, my time was my own. And I had no idea what to do with it. I started small. I cleaned out Dad's room, carefully packing away his clothes and personal items. I kept his favorite sweater, the blue cardigan he wore on good days when we'd sit on the porch together, and donated the rest. I organized his papers, paid his final bills, closed his accounts. The administrative aftermath of death is surprisingly complex, and I threw myself into it because it gave me something to focus on besides the gaping absence where my sister used to be. One afternoon, about a month after the funeral, I was in the attic going through old boxes of family photos when I found something that made me stop. It was a photo album I'd never seen before, leather-bound and worn, filled with pictures from my childhood. There I was at 5, gap-toothed and grinning, holding Dad's hand at the beach. At 10, helping him fix the porch railing. At 15, both of us covered in flour after a baking disaster. And there was Rachel too, in her own series of moments. Rachel in her graduation gown, Dad's arm around her shoulders, both beaming with pride. Rachel at her first big marketing job, Dad holding a congratulations balloon. Rachel at her wedding, Dad walking her down the aisle with tears in his eyes. He'd loved us both. That was clear in every photo, every captured moment. We'd just shown our love differently. And in the end, that difference had cost Rachel everything she'd thought she'd inherit. But had it cost me more? I thought about the jobs I'd turned down, the relationships that had withered because I couldn't give them enough attention, the friends who'd eventually stopped calling because I was never available. I'd made my choice freely. No one had forced me to become Dad's caregiver. But it had been a choice with consequences, and only now was I beginning to understand how vast those consequences were. I was 38 years old, living in a house worth nearly $1 million, with no career, no partner, and a sister who hated me. Was I better off than Rachel? I had the house, yes, but she had a life. She had a husband, a career, friends, experiences. What did I have? 15 years of memories and a paid-off mortgage. My phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Jennifer? The voice was familiar but unexpected. It's Margaret. Margaret Wilson. I don't know if you remember me. I was your father's hospice nurse the last few months. Of course I remember, I said, surprised. Hi, Margaret. How are you? I'm well, dear. I'm calling because, well, I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I heard about your father's will. Small town, you know how word travels. I felt my stomach tighten. Oh, I want you to know something, Margaret continued. Your father talked about you constantly during my visits, about how proud he was of you, about how guilty he felt that you'd sacrificed so much. He wrestled with that will decision, Jennifer. He agonized over it. But ultimately, he felt it was the only way to make things right, the only way to acknowledge what you'd given up. Tears pricked my eyes. Thank you for telling me that. There's something else, Margaret said. You gave up a lot for your father, but you also gave him something precious. You gave him dignity. You gave him comfort. You gave him the ability to die in his own home, surrounded by love, instead of in some sterile facility. That matters. Don't let anyone, including yourself, diminish what you did. After we hung up, I sat in the attic for a long time, holding that photo album, letting her words sink in. Maybe I hadn't lost 15 years. Maybe I'd invested them. And maybe the return on that investment wasn't just a house. It was knowing I'd done the right thing. That when Dad took his last breath, he wasn't alone. He wasn't scared. He was home. 3 months after the will reading, I did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I went on vacation. Just a week-long trip to the coast, staying in a small bed and breakfast, walking on the beach, reading books that weren't about caregiving or medical conditions. It felt strange and indulgent and absolutely necessary. On the last day of the trip, sitting on the beach watching the sunset, I got a text from an unknown number. My first instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity won. "It's Rachel. Don't delete this. Please." I stared at the message for a long time, watching the words blur as tears filled my eyes. I hadn't heard from her since she'd stormed out of the notary's office. Another message came through. "I've been in therapy, working through a lot of things. I'm not ready to see you yet, but I wanted to say, I'm sorry. You were right. About all of it. I'm sorry." I typed and deleted responses for 10 minutes. Finally, I settled on something simple. "Thank you for saying that. I'm here when you're ready to talk." She didn't respond, and I didn't expect her to. But it was a start, a crack in the wall that had formed between us. Maybe someday, we'd find our way back to being sisters. Maybe not. Either way, I knew I'd be okay. When I returned home, I made a decision. I wasn't going to sell the house, at least not yet. But I wasn't going to live in it as a shrine to the past either. I started making changes. I painted Dad's room, a soft yellow instead of the beige it had been forever. I converted one bedroom into an office space and started taking online courses in graphic design, something I'd been interested in before I became a full-time caregiver. I reconnected with old friends, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. I joined a book club. I started volunteering at the local hospice, using my experience to help other families navigate the complicated journey of caring for dying loved ones. The house slowly transformed from a place of loss into a place of living. 6 months after the funeral, I hosted my first dinner party. Just a few people, friends from the book club, Margaret from hospice, a neighbor I'd gotten to know. We ate pasta and drank wine and laughed, and for the first time in forever, the house felt warm and alive. "To new beginnings," Margaret said, raising her glass. "To new beginnings," we all echoed. That night, after everyone left, I stood in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Dad had taught me to make pancakes all those years ago, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness, exactly, but something close. Peace, maybe. Or hope. The house still held all those memories of Dad, of those 15 years of caregiving. But now it was making new memories too. It was becoming mine in a way that went beyond legal ownership. I was finally allowing myself to build a life here, not just exist in suspended animation. I thought about Rachel sometimes, wondered how she was doing, whether she'd ever truly forgive Dad for his decision or me for being the recipient of it. I hoped she'd find peace too, in whatever way she needed to find it. But I'd learned something important through all of this. I couldn't live my life waiting for her approval or anyone else's. I'd made my choices. She'd made hers. And we were both living with the consequences. If you connected with this story about family, sacrifice, and finding your way forward, I'd love for you to stay connected for more real-life stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Dad had been right about one thing. Love doesn't mean everything gets divided equally. It means everything gets divided fairly. And fair doesn't always feel good. It doesn't always tie up neatly with everyone happy and reconciled. Sometimes fair means acknowledging painful truths. Sometimes it means relationships fracture and change in ways you can't control. But sometimes, if you're lucky, if you're patient, if you're willing to do the hard work of moving forward, fair eventually becomes right. And right, I was learning, was a foundation you could build a life on. I walked through the house one more time before bed, turning off lights, checking locks. My house, my life, my choice about what came next. And for the first time in 15 years, I felt ready to make that choice without guilt, without resentment, without looking backward. Tomorrow, I'd wake up and keep building, keep learning, keep growing. keep living. That, I think, is what Dad had really wanted all along. Not just to give me a house, but to give me permission to have a life again. To be more than just a caretaker. To be myself. And finally, I was ready to accept that gift.